Welcome everyone to the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series, and thank you for joining us. Today we'll be talking about maximizing youth voice in mentoring. I'm Sydney Adams and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. We have a wonderful panel of three insightful young people who have expertise on this topic. So without further ado, let's get started. Next slide, please, Minnie. Thank you. Before we get started, I wanted to share some housekeeping information. In 1 week, you'll receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides and view the webinar recording. You can also access this information directly by going to Mentor's website in the next week. And to continually improve the series, we're looking for your input. A short survey will pop up as you exit the webinar. So if you could please take 3 minutes to give us some feedback, we'd really appreciate it. Next slide, please. And we want this webinar to be a participatory experience, so please use the question box to ask questions throughout the webinar. Minnie will be queuing up questions to share with panelists during the Q&A portion of this webinar. We may not get to all of the questions because there are several hundred of you on the webinar, but we will try to do our best. The questions that we share with our panelists are generally ones that broaden or deepen the conversation. So first I want to start with getting a sense of who's with us today. So we have two short polls. The first poll is going to ask the question, what is your experience level in the mentoring field? Are you a beginner? Are you experienced? Or are you an expert? And I'll give everybody a couple of moments to answer that. And it seems that great. So that poll's closed. We have almost 61% experienced, and welcome to everybody. And the second poll question that will be asked is what is your role in the mentoring field? Are you a practitioner? So do you work in a mentoring program? Are you a technical assistance provider? Are you a funder? Are you a mentor? Or if you are none of those, you can put other and introduce yourself in the chat and what your role is and what you hope to learn from this conversation today. See, we have a majority practitioners with us today. Yeah, 57% practitioners. That's great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us and welcome. And I hope and believe that this conversation will be applicable to everyone on the line today. So thank you for joining us. So I'll start with the main topics of today's webinar. Our three main topics will be mentoring relationships and programs, what our panelists want everyone to take away from this conversation today, and moving into a topic that we all have some familiarity with is mentoring during the pandemic. And so I can start by introducing myself again. My name is Sydney Adams. I've been working in the mentoring field and in mentoring for a while now, and I've been working with Mentor to think of the most effective ways to include youth voice in the mentoring work that we do. And as we continue to include youth in this work, I want to include them in this conversation as much as possible. I'm currently in my final semester at Boston University, so I will be graduating this year. And I'm very excited to introduce you to our panelists today. I want to introduce our panelists, and I want to ask them first. The question is how long they've been a mentee and what sort of steps has their mentor taken in sustaining their mentoring relationship throughout their time together. And our first panelist is Kendall Miller. So Kendall, would you like to come and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kendall, and I have been involved in mentoring since my sophomore year in high school. So for about almost 3 years now. And I was selected to actually serve as a student board member on my mentoring kind of council, which is really, really cool. And basically what I do there is I give insight to basically where funding for different kinds of mentoring programs can be allocated, what would most be beneficial for the young people in my area, and also we talk about funding for after-school programs as well.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Kendall. The next person I'd like to introduce is Yvette.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yvette. I am a senior at Queens College I've been for 4 years within the mentoring field. I started off being a mentor and facilitating others, obtaining mentors, and then recently I've experienced being a mentee.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Yvette. And our final panelist is Sesha. Sesha, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, Sesha, I think you're muted.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Hi, so my name is Sasha Real. I'm a freshman at Whittier College, and I've been a mentee for almost 3 years now. I started in my junior year of high school with the Youth Mentoring Action Network. And in senior year, I took more of a leadership approach where I was able to actually start mentoring adults on how to mentor young people. And I'm still part of the program, but now obviously I've taken more of a leadership role than a mentee.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for joining us today. And jumping right into the questions and going from Sesha's very unique role as a leadership and as a young person who's able to mentor adults, I want to talk a little bit about the often top-down relationship we see in mentoring relationships or mentoring programs. And I want to ask all these panelists, what actions did your mentor take in ensuring that you had an equitable share in the relationship? And I think, Yvette, would you like to start us on this conversation?
Yes, of course. It was quite a transition for myself becoming a mentee. I am used to being on the behind the scenes role of making sure everyone is communicating, making sure everyone is okay. And so stepping into the mentee role, my mentor understood that I did not know how to be a mentee. And I think that's something that is often not spoken about. It's more about the mentor asking the mentee, what can I be of service for you, rather than do you even know how to be a mentee? And so my mentor really understood that and made sure that she was also in my journey of discovering what I need as a mentee and how to communicate that. And so we went everything from understanding and figuring out what means of communication, whether it's email, texting, phone call, video chat, all the way to understanding how to set appropriate goals for what I wanted, having more clarity and conciseness in gathering that. And so I think it's important for mentors to also address the individual and see how much of an expert they are in being mentees. Not everyone has had the experience to have a mentor before. And so it's quite it can be a little bit scary. And in the long run, I found that before, when I didn't have a mentor that addressed that aspect of me, it led to a lot more confusion later on and just inefficiency in the things that we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing up that fact of oftentimes when both young people and adults enter these relationships, not all the time everybody knows what goals to set or knows what to expect from the relationship. And that's a great point of sitting down and taking the time to look at those and say, what do we have individually and what can we bring to this relationship together as two separate people? Kendall, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I completely agree with Yvette. Like, it's definitely strange, most young people, well, a lot, like, it's very common, young people, they aren't too used to asking for help a lot of the times. They aren't too used to, building, a relationship with maybe someone outside of their family or maybe outside of a close friend, and a mentor-mentee relationship is very unique, I think, compared to, most relationships that, we develop as we learn and as we grow. But something my mentor really did that helped me, because, when I first met her, I was 15, I think, and I was super just nervous about, making new relationships with anyone, period. but she did a really great job at sort of breaking down those boundaries that, kind of made things stilted or awkward. Like I remember every time, I greeted her, she would greet me with, "Hello, my friend," and something like that. It doesn't seem like it would mean that much, but, just her letting me know that we were in fact friends and she wasn't just, some adult to tell me what to do, that meant a lot to me.
Yeah, and talking about those specific, just small details that we often see and often maybe look past or look over a little bit, and they can be really important in the long run, especially because you bring it up right now in this conversation, Kendall. Sasha, could you expand a little bit on that and talk about how you had sort of that unique relationship where you've described it as you were kind of spoiled in your mentoring relationship
Yeah.
because you always had that sort of non-authoritarian top-down relationship with your mentors?
Yeah, so like you said, yeah, I was really spoiled in my situation in which being part of EMON, it was completely different from any other mentoring programs I've seen where they were really about asking us about what we needed and what we wanted. My mentor Tori and Isabella always made sure to cater to like our needs and ask us, what is something you're struggling with that we could provide a service for you? And we would tell them, okay, well, mental health has been something that's been really affecting me. How about that? Or access to nutritious food, that's the problem. So they would cater to those needs by, okay, well, let's get a therapist. So they would hire therapists to come and talk to us about ways to deal with our mental health. And so that was really beneficial because it instilled like a trust, right? Because I could trust them and see that they weren't gonna be here to tell me what I needed and tell me what I needed to do, but it was really about a giving and receiving type of relationship, and being able to benefit from mutually benefiting from it. I didn't feel like I was being used, nor did I feel like I was using them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And thinking about how that was your first introduction to mentoring and to that type of relationship. I want to talk more about what you took away from those experiences. So Kendall mentioned that she was very nervous when she first entered the relationship and thinking about being a young person and meeting anybody who is older than you and thinking that like it's a very important interaction. And so what sort of skills did you take away that from those sort of relationships with adults do you take into your relationships with adults today that are not necessarily mentors to you?
Right. So I think, like Kendall said, there was nervousness because before there's a lot of distrust between me and like adult figures. I always felt beneath and belittled by authority figures. And so having that trusting relationship with my mentors, it taught me to have better relationships with adults later on in life, leaving high school. Now I'm more assertive and I'm more comfortable knowing that that these authority figures aren't above me. That even though there's a certain level of respect I have to attain to them, I need respect too, and I have to be respected too. I may be young and I may be considered naive, but I also demand a certain respect that lots of times young people aren't given because of the sheer fact that we're younger. So I think that's helped me a lot, be more assertive and um, be able to trust adults more.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much for sharing that. Kendall, did you want to expand on what you said originally about that nervousness and how that nervousness has sort of changed into, I mean, now you're on a board for your mentoring program and are in charge of being a representative for young people. So obviously that nervousness isn't necessarily there anymore.
Yeah, like exactly what Sasha said. Being able to build, a relationship like that with, someone who is older than you, it definitely, I think, prepares you for so many things later on in life. Like, all of us are kind of at the age where we're entering the workforce, and we're starting our professional careers. And having a mentor really, I think, helped prepare me for that and my interactions, with other adults. And like Sasha said, like, my relationship with my mentor made me realize that, even if this person that I'm talking to is an adult, they still owe me respect just as much as, I owe them respect. And I think that's extremely important, especially, like I said, entering the workforce and knowing like your boundaries, and knowing, what you want out of, your different relationships with adults. And a really big thing that, I was thinking about is my relationship with my mentor has taught me how to mentor other people as well. It has inspired me, to be that same person that she was for me, which I think is super awesome.
Yeah, that's a great thing. And thank you, Kendall and Sasha, for bringing in that perspective of being a young person and starting to enter a more adult world. And I want to point this question to Yvette as well, who is in a similar situation as me, where we're a lot older and a lot more removed from being youth necessarily. But Yvette, did you want to share anything about what your mentoring relationship has taught you about relationships with other adults?
Yeah, so actually, my very first experience in being a mentee wasn't the most fond. It wasn't the greatest. And the reason being is because the mentor, it was their first time being a mentor, and it was my first time being a mentee. And so at the moment, I didn't think it was going to be an issue. It later on did become an issue because there wasn't really guidance and things like that. But what I took away from it the most was just the honesty and being able to tell one another, hey, I'm new, but then doing something about it. And I think that component was missing in that particular situation, because the honesty is valuable, but then it's about the actions that come afterwards as well. And so I think a lot of the times people are afraid of being a mentor because they say, well, I don't have experience talking to anyone. Well, you don't necessarily have to have experience being a mentor, but you do have experience. You are an individual who have gone through things, and you are also potentially a resource. And so understanding too that a lot of people do bring a lot of things to the table, and seeing that as what it is versus trying to fit a mold as to what a mentor is in our own mind, because that isn't always necessarily what the definition of a mentor is to the mentee. And that circles back to the importance of communication and understanding the expectations, understanding the levels of experience in being a mentor, and then in general within their career field, combining that with the communication that I mentioned earlier. And so for me, it would be really about being upfront and honest as to what I know, what I don't know, but also showing that I'm willing to expand my own personal knowledge. But while I'm doing that, connect whoever I'm speaking to others who have more knowledge than I do. So they aren't stuck in a position where they're with somebody who they think, I'm just figuring this out with you. And so it's like, then are you a mentor, or are you just an individual who's going along with me as well? And so that's what I would say that would be the greatest thing that has helped me in speaking to others.
Right. Yeah. And I really want to hone in on that point you made about the actions that come from these experiences, because it moves us right into our next topic about what you all want our audience to know in this conversation. And the question about actions is like, what do current and potential mentors need to be aware of specifically when engaging with relationships with young people? Oops.
Okay, so something that I've been thinking about a lot. So as as I talked about, I'm on a board and for a mentoring program, and these may not be people who are necessarily working with the kids directly, but they do have like a lot of say in mentoring. And I think mentors in general just need to know this, but actively like seeking out insight from the youth is really, I think, what is going to help you make the most out of your relationship. It's really going to cultivate that trust, in that bond. I know, like, maybe I worked with a lot of mentors sometimes, and they always say, like, I don't know how to, like, make this, like, I don't know how to form this relationship. Like, it's still stilted, it's still awkward, it's still weird, or, you know, I don't think I'm necessarily giving them what they want. But I think actively seeking insight rather than just taking the wheel yourself and just, you know, doing what you think you need to do, you know, as an adult. I think that um, taking taking I'm sorry, actively seeking insight is definitely what's going to help you formulate and cultivate those bonds that you really want to. So
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think we lost Yvette for a second there, but um, I wanted to return to Yvette's example that she gave us of sitting down with the mentor and the mentee and the mentor sitting down and having that conversation about what things that two individuals can bring into a relationship. So Yvette, could you share a specific example of one skill that both you and your mentor didn't have before you entered the relationship and were able to cultivate together?
Yes. So I will say that my most recent mentor, I did get very, very lucky in terms of just being similar, having similar personalities. We're both type A people. We both have similar personal interests. So I was, like Sasha mentioned, very spoiled in that sense. It wasn't really still, and we were able to have a lot of personable conversations. But I will say that one of the things that she and I would agree on, I think, on having is the ability to focus on the work that is on hand, but also being sensible to life and looking at each other in a holistic manner. And I think that's really important when you're with a mentee, understanding that they all have different personalities. Some mentees will want you as a best friend and as a support system and there to vent to and be as a resource. Other mentees won't. Other mentees are there for the simple goals that were established, and that's that. And so not to necessarily take it at heart, but also it's part of the role. It's part of the role to be able to be sensitive to one another, not only as to the mentee, but the mentee to the mentor as well. And so, but also being open to change. I will say that I learned a lot with my mentor in understanding that just life as it goes on, it changes. We went from being clicking as a mentor mentee, and now we're much more leaning into being actual friends because of the interest. And so, being open to change, but also being open if it doesn't change. Not every mentor-mentee relationship will flourish into a beautiful friendship, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that the goals failed or that the relationship failed. I think it's nice to have potential expectations or goals for what you would like for the relationship to go into, but if it doesn't, being okay with that as well. And also reassuring one another that as a mentor, you're doing the best that you can, and as a mentee, they're trying to communicate the best that they can.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, that no matter if the relationship does succeed or does it fail, you'll take something away from it, whether it be good or bad, but you'll learn for future relationships. Sasha, I wanted to turn to you and talk more about your unique experience about mentoring adults and what kind of advice you have to share to our audience about what they need to be aware of when entering these mentoring relationships.
So I think what mentors need to be aware of, especially if you're dealing with young people, is to listen to us. You know, having open conversation with young people about what they need and what they want is really important, just being transparent. And I think for me that it was kind of interesting because senior year I was starting to mentor adults, which I would never thought of doing such a thing. But my mentor, she really just threw me in the situation and she pushed me to do it, because for me it was crazy to think how can I contribute to an adult person's life and tell them how to mentor young people. You know, I met with this collective group of really educated and I forgot the name. It was a community organizing group in Inglewood, and me and my friend Cameron actually were sent to mentor them. And it was crazy because we were like, being around all these like educated women and hearing them see that they had struggles with mentoring young people. There were lawyers, there was doctors there, and they were asking us, how do we mentor young people, especially how do we mentor women of color, Black women, and these young girls. So it was interesting because learning everything that I did from my mentor, we were taught how to listen to these young people and to cater really to their needs. Don't bring them anything that they don't actually need. Focusing on that one-on-one relationship and not imposing, like not assigning a mentor to a certain person, because that's not going to be helpful. If you guys don't click, it's not going to work. So making sure that you don't push those types of relationships if you don't have that sort of connection. Letting the young people, if anything, come to you and tell you what they need and what they want. So that was what was really unique for me and I think very moving, is that I learned that I actually have a lot to bring to the table, and teaching these educated women it really helped me to see that, adults have problems too. Like they have struggles with mentoring us. There's a generational gap and shift. So being able to just address those gaps and address those intersections of like, color, creed, and like just the different populations is really beneficial.
Yeah, that's a really crucial point, that oftentimes you will be a young person and be thrust into these situations and have to sort of learn to teach other people, and you'll come out of it realizing you knew a lot more than you actually did. And I want to actually bring in Kendall's experience as being on the board for her mentoring organization and seeing that you have to be a representative for all those young people. And oftentimes you see the same thing that Sasha pointed out, that like sometimes adults just pair young people with mentors without really thinking about where the relationship will overlap, or where they'll come together on similar topics and ideas or modes of thinking. So I wondered if you could share a little bit about how you improved the sort of matchmaking process in your mentoring organization.
Yeah, so it's definitely a process, because like we said, you can't just mush two people together and just expect everything to work out and expect, it to be fine and dandy and, whatever. So I work very closely with my mentoring coordinator, and we are the ones who are basically like on the ground level. We're recruiting mentors, we're recruiting mentees, and we always try and make sure we get to know our mentors and our mentees before we just throw them with any random person. We try and get to know like their strengths, what they care about, what they're passionate about, all the different facets of their personality, and then that's how we really try to make those matches. And we always try and stay extremely open, to the mentees, like, hey, if you are like uncomfortable in any way, or if you just don't feel like this is working out for you, you can withdraw like literally as soon as you want, whenever you want to. And I think that's also very important, is addressing the young person's boundaries and making sure, that all of their needs are being met, and that, they are being validated, because like Cesar said, like we it's important to, understand the differences, in our backgrounds, like our race, our ethnicity, the languages we speak, the money that we come from, all of that really contributes to how we approach our relationships and how successful certain relationships with certain people are. So it's very important to keep factors like that in the back of your mind when you are making those matches, and to be very transparent and letting mentees know that, like, hey, like, this is not a task for you to do. Like, if you don't want to do this, it's fine. Like, you can drop out of it whenever you want to.
Yeah, and you speak closely about speak about working closely with your mentoring coordinator. And I want to know, and this leads us into our last topic of how that relationship and how those relationships that you're making between mentor and mentee have shifted during the pandemic, now that you're not allowed to be meeting these people in person and you have to meet them over a phone call, over Zoom, over an email, text message, whatever it may be. If you could share a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think many mentoring programs, like mine, they've definitely kind of been hit hard by this pandemic, especially in terms of being able to formulate new mentor-mentee bonds. With the pandemic, I'd say it's virtually impossible to try and formulate a bond and then keep that bond, online. That's very hard to do. Especially, I live in a lower income community, so not everyone has access to internet, stable access. And so something that we've tried to do that has kind of worked out for us is we have mentors and mentees write letters between each other. It's super adorable. We have a mediator who, delivers the letters like between houses, just so, privacy concerns, that sort of thing. But, a letter is a little more personal than a text message, and it's a little more accessible, especially in a lower income community like mine. But yeah, in terms of keeping those bonds, it's very hard. Me and my mentoring coordinator, we have a meeting every Wednesday, and I think like that meeting, we just sit there and we just go, like we don't know what to do. Like it's so hard. But I think something that has really helped that my mentor has done in the middle of this pandemic is just, letting me know when she's available and letting me know like what times it would be great for her to talk, because sometimes like when everything is going wrong and everything is crazy, you just need somebody to just sit there and talk to. And so, she's always like, hey, I know our last call, you said you had a test today, how was that test? Are you feeling okay? Do you need to talk about anything? Just little things like that really help, especially for a lot of us who are, confined to our rooms all day. So
Yeah, talking about those small moments again of just like some things that we oftentimes overlook, but those end up being the things that we remember the most. Yvette, would you like to say something?
Yeah, so in terms of the pandemic, with my mentor specifically within Mentor, the organization, we hadn't met. It was intended for us to meet in person during the summer, towards the end of our program. And so I will say I haven't felt necessarily that withdrawal of we once would be able to hang out and then all of a sudden I can't get a hold of you. But what I will say is that what does help is, even, let's say, it varies, everyone has different availabilities, but even let's say watching a show on our own times and then coming back together and talking about that, or just trying to set up video chats that isn't in relation to what is being done, has also helped a lot, so that it feels more of it's almost as if we went out for coffee. Or I've had other video chats where we just sit there and have our coffee literally and just talking. And so trying to do things and stimulate activities that we would be doing in person, and trying our best doing video chat, calling also another thing, because for me specifically, it's been very hard when only emailing or texting I almost lose sense of the individual. It goes from I'm speaking to someone to I'm just interacting with bubbles and texts, and it gets desensitizing really. And so doing things like that where I can see the individual's face and hear their voice and do these things has really helped a lot. In terms of, I did want to mention something else in terms of when relationships don't completely connect. Like Kendall said, it is hard to be able to match two individuals that have no idea who they are or may not even have similar interests or personalities. I will say that to one thing that I've seen that helps is equipping both the mentor and the mentee with certain guides or templates, or almost a plan of action if the relationship seems that it's not working. Because I feel like a lot of times what I've been told is, hey, come to me if you don't feel comfortable. And it's like, I think, especially in my experience with groups, minorities, we're already not used to asking for help. And so let alone asking for help when it's about an opportunity that was given to you. I know that's something I struggled with. And so then it goes to, and I'm just going from personal experience and what others have told me, then it's the mentee feeling, but I don't want to feel like, or I don't want them to know that I'm not appreciative of the opportunity. And so also being sensitive to that and understanding that it is a very prominent factor for a lot of mentees. And so equipping them with perhaps a template as to, you know, on the third time, if the communication doesn't get better, then maybe reach out, or even a coordinator being willing to sit with a mentor and mentee and be the mediator of how are we going to work this out? Is it even fixable per se? And if not, then being okay with that too. And also telling, I mean, Kendall alluded to this, but telling both the mentor and mentee to know that it won't always work out and that that's okay. That doesn't, it isn't a reflection of the individuals. It just so happens to be that it wasn't a match. And then, you know, also understand that there is an alternative and that there is a brighter side, not only ending it on a negative note.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I wanted to bring up your point that you made about sometimes when during the pandemic, a lot of the times our relationships and conversations turn into just tasks that we have to do on the screen. And I was wondering if you had any advice to mentors about how to prevent them from not seeing that mentee is struggling and doesn't want to reach out. Like you said, oftentimes they're young people who just want to be sort of just want to show that they're appreciative for an opportunity and don't want to incite conflict or don't want to bring up any conflict, and will only be within the relationship so far as it extends on the screen. And I was wondering if you had any examples where that has been a struggle for you and anybody else, or if anybody else would like to add to that, that'd be great too.
So I had certain mentor-mentee relationships where it seemed to be that it was only a task for them. And I will say that representation is very important in a mentor-mentee relationship that I've noticed. I've had situations where the individual was just not able to relate to my personal experiences or understand where my perspective or mindset was coming from. And so if you're a mentor who's white and your mentee is a person of color, understanding that there are certain experiences that are just, they're not going to be able to relate to you. And so as a mentor, it's your duty as the adult, as the one who's essentially caring and responsible for this and nurturing the mentee, understanding your position and the differences that you may have with your mentee, but also it goes back to being proactive and bringing a resource that they could have some kind of relation to. And again, it's about knowing the differences and then being able to bridge that gap, not feeling less than or making the other person feel less than, but trying to be sensitive to their history and their past experiences, and understanding that sometimes you just don't have the same opportunities or the same way in which you grew up. Because I have had moments where I've been told, well, you know, we're here for you. And it's like, well, when you live 20 years, people telling you that you don't ask help because you're a burden, it's hard to just go and accept we're here for you. And so being proactive and understanding that although not all, but there are components that, especially if your mentee is a person of color, that they are suffering or going through, or possibly they don't even know, but subconsciously it's ingrained in them, and being sensitive to that.
Yeah, and especially thinking about young people who are maybe experiencing these emotions or or having these experiences for the first time, and that you're the first adult person who has tried to address these situations with them, and it's not always going to be that first conversation is going to bring out all the answers everybody wants, but keep working at it and keep doing those small things and keep checking in. It'll help and build the relationship. Sesha, did you want to add something to any of those questions?
Yeah, so I think Yvette brought up a really good point about representation and how important that is. I think, again, I bring up the point that I'm spoiled, in which like Iman, it's Black owned and queer owned by two amazing women, and so all the projects that they've done have been catered towards these populations, and so I just saw how important it was, because having like the Black Girl Summit, which was one of them, it's super important, and hearing like my friends and see how emotional and moving it was for them to be able to have intergenerational conversations with other Black women and talk about the issues, and bring awareness to the fact that like they're not talked about a lot, and so that to see that is really moving, and I think that's why they've been so successful, is because people see the work that they're doing, and so they invest more, because they're seeing that they're putting special attention to populations of people who otherwise have no means to get help. So seeing that is just super important, that representation, and also just making sure in terms of like during the pandemic, it has been hard. I mean, at the beginning it was easier because no one thought we were going to be in the pandemic for so long. So there was always scheduling Zoom calls where we would just talk about movies that we watched or what we were going to do once this was over. And like that kind of died down because stuff starts to get more serious and everyone's starting to go through more stuff and having to struggle more. So scheduling those times to be able to talk and check up on one another has been increasingly difficult. And then just feeling again like lots of us are aging out. So like not aging out, but like we're getting older. So the attention is not on us as much as it is anymore. Now the attention is being pushed on the younger mentees, the ones who are still in high school. So that's been hard because obviously you want the attention to be put on them too, but then you kind of feel like, dang, I hope that they're still thinking about me. And doing little things like Tori, she constantly reaches out to me like every now and then to see how I'm doing, to see if I need anything. Sometimes not even just to talk about stuff that's going on in the world. Like we would have discussions about like the protests that happened over the summer, or her asking me like how my Christmas, stuff like that. It's just little things like that that you said, Sydney. Those are the ones that you really remember the most important, because you don't want to lose those connections. The interconnected world, and making sure that you keep those authentic relationships that are genuine, and these are people who actually care about you, is important. Or like success for your job or anything, but just in terms of you want to keep genuine relationships. Those are beneficial towards like your mental health and your self-esteem, and you want to be able to give back to your community. Seeing that she put so much in my life, now I feel the need to put more into another person's life.
Yeah, that's really important. And it brings us right back to what Yvette brought up at the beginning of this conversation about being mentors entering relationships and sometimes forgetting that they were in a similar situation where they weren't always sure that somebody was there to address their needs or address their concerns. And being that we are older, getting older and aging, I put that in air quotes, out of mentoring programs, but we still look for those relationships and we still value those relationships, and we still are constantly thinking about how to upkeep those relationships. This has been a great conversation, and I wish it could go on forever, but I do want to give some time to some of the questions that the audience has been asking. So this first question, somebody is asking, they would love to hear more about what can a mentor or adult do, or if you have examples that would make young people feel like they're being respected or heard in mentoring relationships. So whoever wants to answer that question, feel free.
Something that's always meant a lot to me, and like, again, a little thing, but like it means a lot, is like asking, like I was saying, asking a young person's insight on something, like showing that you really care about their perspective and showing that you really care about what they care about, and that you're willing to have those conversations with them and you're willing to learn from them. And like showing them that, you're viewing them as someone, not just a young person that you're teaching things, but a young person who can teach you things. That's an extremely important and like crucial way to really make your mentee feel like, they also have, a say in the relationship, that they also, are playing a big part in, being in this mentor-mentee relationship.
Something I'd say is with giving the mentee responsibility and when it's met to complete whatever thing that is being spoken about, to respect it. It can go as little as when is the best time for you to speak, or when is the best time for you and I to meet, and the mentor respecting that of, yes, okay, that is it, and not really trying to tamper with it. Of course, if it's not feasible, then it's not. But when the mentee speaks, or when the mentee suggests something, or when they do anything like that, give some kind of input, to take it and not only say, yes, we can consider it, but actually flesh it out of, I want to know more. What else do you think should come after? And almost being the listening ear and have the mentee speak, because I think when you're a young person, when you're trying to speak, you're usually silenced. And so when you're giving the mentee an environment where what they want to say is welcomed, and if anything, something of highly importance, and just writing it down or making a plan or things like that, it really does make the young person feel, oh, what I'm saying is important, and it's being respected because something is being done about it. It's actually being considered, rather than, okay, I'll keep that in my mind, rather than actually fleshing it out and being proactive about it.
Yeah, those are great responses. Thank you. Sasha, did you have anything to add to this question? Or if you don't, that's perfectly fine.
I think they said it perfectly.
Yeah. Another question is, somebody's asking, as a professional in the mentoring field, they're interested in giving the youth in their program a voice. Their question is, how are you all of our panelists, approached about being leaders in this area? So basically, how do I come to you as a person in the mentoring field and ask you to be on a panel such as this, or give insight to our audiences and all the different conversations that we've had? And like, what are some advices that you can give about how you ask a young person to be an expert in the field, and being able to compensate them fairly, and being able to ensure that their voice is heard?
Yeah, I think this is super important to address, because I think, everyone on this panel with me can agree that we love being asked to like do things. We love being asked, to we love being asked for our perspectives on things. It's like I said, it's one of those things that makes us, feel heard when you directly like come to us. Sometimes though, I know, like, especially because I'm 18, I'm still in high school, maybe reaching out to youth who are still, pretty young, it can be pretty weird to navigate, or pretty, like of course you want to be cautious, of course you want to be respectful of boundaries and everything. For example, recently I was reached out for an opportunity. However, it was a sort of strange situation. It was like a guy who was very much older than me, and he was like, hey, I'm a part of this program. Do you want to come meet with me to do this? And obviously me being a woman, being, a young person, that made me, a little, I don't know about that. I really would love to have an opportunity, but at the same time, I didn't really appreciate the way that that situation was approached. So another thing you can really do that would be beneficial is reaching out, so that young person is a part of a mentoring program, maybe reaching out, to, like I said, a mentoring coordinator, or maybe a higher up, an adult in that program, so they can kind of be a mediator and, set up those situations and set up those opportunities for you.
Yeah, that's a great point about, a lot of the times Kendall, you're very familiar with these situations of being asked for your expertise, but sometimes it is a young person's first time being asked for their expertise, and it would be really beneficial if somebody they knew and trusted had experience with the person who's asking for your expertise before going straight into that situation, and not blindly, but a little bit inexperienced, I would say. Yvette or Sasha, did you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I would say it's okay. Thank you. But I've been in situations where I've been asked to speak or just invited, and just my simple name being a struggle to be said to the people who are listening to me. And so I think it's minor. I don't know if it's a minor detail for the organization, but being mindful of putting a name to the face that you're bringing onto these situations. I think as a young person, we usually don't get a lot of recognition, let alone in high school. And so being able to say, hey, this is so-and-so individual. Of course, it's a little bit different when they're under 18. You can't necessarily say, their school or whatnot, but giving them that moment of shine where they get to express and identify themselves as who they are, and letting themselves really say, these are my goals. This is what I'm working towards. This is what I've accomplished. This is, so-and-so. And so giving that moment of introduction really does help the young person vocalize what they're thinking and the changes that they think should be implemented.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sasha, I know you wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, so for me, they just thrust me in lots of these situations. They're like, oh, just, can you do this job for me and we'll compensate you with money. And to hear that, being like, you're going to give me money just to tell these people what you guys do for me, that's amazing. And so obviously if you have the means, compensating young people for their time, is important. But also knowing that lots of times we don't just do it for the money. Most of the time we will do it voluntarily without being needed to be compensated with anything. And so especially if they're topics that actually interest us, that's going to get us to be at the table and want to do these things. And again, like Yvette and Kendall said, making sure that young people, they're with someone who they trust, making sure that send them an email with the name of the organization so it's legit and you feel comfortable, oh, this is a program, and with what their messages and what they're planning to do. So being transparent, give young people all the details. We're very, lots of us, we're still young, so we don't really understand what all the processes, and so being able to explain to us oh, this is what we're going to do, these are the people you're going to talk to, and showing who the people introducing each person is really helpful. So yeah, I think just doing that, it will make a lot of people willingly go and want to talk about.
Yeah, those are great points. I can move to another question now. Somebody's asking, how would you want your mentor to go about addressing any concerns they have for your well-being without telling you what to do or taking away your agency? I know we've talked a little bit about this, but if anybody wants to expand on something that they brought up, that'd be great as well.
I'd say first and foremost, for the mentor to be aware of the way the individual who's receiving the information it's being delivered, because there are some mentees where I've experienced that the easiest way that I can think of it is add fluff. Just be very sensitive and very emotionally intelligent with them, and giving them that patience, and make sure that I'm reassuring and saying positive things as I'm bringing up the things that I'm concerned about. There are other mentees that I can tell them how it is, and they are able to accept it as constructive feedback rather than an attack to themselves. And so I think that would be the first thing that the mentor should pay attention to. And how am I going to deliver these concerns that I have to the mentee without them feeling like they're being attacked, or that something wrong is going to happen? Or I think a lot of the times we almost get scared off of You know, if I am even, maybe they want to be open about something and they're afraid of doing that because it's like, what are the consequences going to be? Am I going to get in trouble? And so just making sure that the deliverance is tailored to the person who's going to be receiving it. And also, again, it's going back to how comfortable the mentor is, but being honest of perhaps any of their own personal experiences that they've had or struggles, because it's a lot easier to be open and willing to address certain concerns that another person has for me when they are open that they've had the same concerns or similar concerns as well. Because then it's you're no longer an individual who was called in because something's wrong with you, but rather it's coming from an individual who is concerned for you and is compassionate and is able to relate in some way. And if they can't relate, it goes back to bringing someone maybe that they can relate to and they can speak to. And what Kendall mentioned, in maybe it being somebody who they can trust also, and understanding that you as a mentor might not always be the person that they trust, but you could guide them to somebody who they can trust, and have that not be a personal attack to you as a mentor, but just, again, the nature of the situation. And I would highly emphasize the deliverance of it. And then from there, once that is established, is a lot easier to go on in addressing the concerns and then actually putting actionable steps to solve them, etc.
Yeah, that's a great response. Thank you so much. And again, going back to our goal, which is to change the dynamic of mentor-mentee relationships and not have it be a top-down relationship. I want to get in a few more questions before we run out of time. This question I want to focus specifically towards Kendall, because I think you might have some expertise in this. The question is, do you think it's possible to start a relationship virtually? And do you have any advice to this person on how to do that?
Yes, I do think it's possible. I would say it's definitely harder than, trying to do it in person, but I wouldn't say that you can't do it at all. Something that, really helps, obviously, like I said, more personal feeling things, like if you try and do it over text, I feel like that probably wouldn't be the most helpful. I'd say right now in our virtual world, stuff like this, like where you can see the other person that you're talking to, I feel that is super important. And another thing is constant communication. Like you need to make sure you're staying in contact with, the person that you're trying to build a relationship with. Otherwise, like you're either just going to forget about it, or it doesn't feel as important since, we're all virtual right now. But I feel like if you're really diligent about, keep staying in contact, like I said, letting the other person know, like when you're available, letting them know, like, hey, this is the time that, I want to talk, we can talk, or, showing that, you're listening to them, like I said, the test example, stuff like that is super important and super crucial. And if you are very diligent about it, then I completely and wholeheartedly believe that you will be able to keep that relationship.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you so much. And as we're closing out, and I want to pose one more of our audience questions to all three of our panelists, and I think this is a really great question. It asks, how can a mentor be a friend to their mentee while also maintaining appropriate boundaries of the mentor-mentee relationship?
I don't know if I'm trying to say something.
Yeah.
You can go. It's fine.
Yeah, go ahead, Sessa.
Oh my God. Okay. So maintaining like appropriate boundaries between mentee and like mentors, I think, again, we talked about like transparency and being honest with the person. And just right off the bat, if you're encountering a new relationship with a mentee, ask them what their boundaries are. Ask them is it okay for me to text you? Is it okay that I have your personal phone number? Do you prefer me emailing you, calling you? Establish those boundaries early on, and at this, to know that like each mentee is different, and so each one may have different needs, and so your approach may be different from how you deal with another's mentee. Like for me, I'm very like I respond more to confrontation. So like my mentor Tori, like she never sugarcoats anything for me. So sometimes I have to kind of avoid her because like she'll read me into filth and like tell me like you need to stop doing this, it's not okay. And I benefit from that type of confrontation because I think you're just so used to I'm so used to people trying to read my mind. Sometimes we expect our mentors to read our minds and know exactly what we're going through. And so to have a mentor who's like, no, we're not going to do that. Tell me what's wrong and tell me right now, like why, it's been very helpful, and it's taught me to slowly accept that it's okay if people ask you what are you okay. Like it's fine. So just establishing those boundaries early on and know that okay, that may work for me, but another mentee might feel like, I need my space. I would rather if I go to you rather than you come to me. So just establishing those boundaries early on.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to share? That's all right. Well, I think we have time for just about one more question, actually. So does anybody have any advice on how to encourage a new mentee to give a mentor a try when joining a program? So we've talked a little bit about sometimes that first interaction isn't always the best, but how do you help a mentee or a mentor sort of stick out that interaction and say, put in the work in for both people to sort of make the relationship work?
Like I said, with my previous answer about a virtual relationship, it's really just making sure you're diligent with constant communication. Like I remember when I first met my mentor, I was really intimidated. She worked at a law firm. She was very educated, and I was just this girl who went to a super low income, who was from a super low income community, and I went to a high school that was notorious for having bad grades, and our world just felt so completely different, and that just made me so uncomfortable. And I remember I was like, oh, I don't want to do this, I can't do this. But eventually, like you just kind of stick it out, and you meet every week or however often it is. And once you do, make sure you're diligent about keeping in contact, you really start to learn more about the other person. And even though you may not be able to relate to them, you can begin to understand. And once, you have that foundation of understanding, then it's definitely a lot easier to, build a relationship and feel comfortable in that relationship.
Yeah, that's a great point. Building that foundation of understanding, like you said, and just working from there, because not every relationship you're going to enter is going to have immediately that connection. And sometimes it does take a little bit of work to get it going. Sasha or Yvette, would you like to add anything to that? No. And I think that's it. And I think we can wrap up our webinar. And I want to say thank you to Kendall, Sasha, and Yvette for being here today and participating and giving great insight as always. And I have a few housekeeping things for our audience, but I wanted to say thank you to our panelists and thank you for everyone for joining us today. and we can talk a little about additional resources that are available. As always, we want to remind you about other ways to connect and find resources. Mentor scales impact by developing and supporting a national network of affiliates. These affiliates provide the leadership and infrastructure necessary to support the expansion and quality of mentoring relationships in local communities or statewide. Mentor affiliates also serve a unique role as a clearinghouse for training, resources, public awareness, and advocacy. We encourage you to find out whether you have an affiliate in your region and connect with them to learn more about local resources and training opportunities. Additionally, we encourage you to register your program with the Mentoring Connector, a national database of mentoring programs. This zip code searchable database allows mentors and mentees from across the country to find your program and its connection to LinkedIn, NBA Cares, Mentor.gov, and so many other avenues of free program promotion. Finally, check out the OJJDP National Mentoring Resource Center website for non-cost mentoring resources to help you apply evidence-based mentoring practices to your program. The OJJDP NMRC provides evidence reviews on mentoring models and mentoring for special populations, implementation resources from training manuals to mentoring guides, reviewed by NMRC Research Board, and the opportunity to request no-cost training or technical assistance. Additionally, as a reminder, 1 week after this webinar, all attendees will receive an email with a link to the CMWS webpage, where we will post the recording, slides, and additional resources. Also, don't forget, we want your feedback at the end of today's webinar. Please answer the short survey and help us make the series even better. Be sure to visit the CMWS webpage on the mentoring website for an archive of all past webinars and information about upcoming webinars. Thanks to everybody for joining us today, and please join us via the link for the next webinar, and we hope to see you there.